G'day, it's Clyde Roxing here. I found that using bearings is unbelievably complicated. And what got me over the line is I was a brake mechanic for 15 odd years. I actually was a hydraulic rebuilder, but I have done the whole gamut of brake specialist work. I've worked on vehicles, I've done, remachined drum and disc brakes and all that sort of thing. You're doing brake and clutch, you do the whole thing. I've been a bonder of machine clutches, I've done the whole gamut of brake and clutch. But one of the things about bearings you do not know, and frankly you're going to be hard pressed to find anybody that's going to explain it to you. You know why? Because to understand you understand bearings, you've got to be a bloody grease monkey. And like, I'm not knocking mechanics. Mechanics compared to panel beaters, they're a lot smarter than panel beaters. Mechanics are pretty smart blokes, but they are not at this level. And so what you have here is when you work with stuff a real lot, you remember stuff, so it becomes second nature to you. Now, with a wheel that's on a car, you've got to have two bearings. And the best way to understand this is taper bearings, because plain bearings are very confusing, because you've got inners and outers. And so what you have is where those two vertical lines are, that's the actual, that's the hub that the drum or the disc assembly is bolted to. That's the bolt up to your wheel. And the bolt up to your wheel actually sits on two bearings. So that hub that's on your car, the only thing that's holding that on is two bearings either side of it. And then it's got a bolt that bolts up and pushes the bearings into the, you've got a male and female of the taper bearing, and it pushes them together. So these are more difficult because you've got inners and outers of these bearings. So that means you've got to have 8 bearings for this little toy. It's got to have 8 bearings. It's got to have an inner and outer. And the hard part is when you compress it between the frame, what you have to do is you have to have 2 bits like this. And they have to not go the full length into the frame. They've got to go halfway into the frame. And they've got to compress onto the frame and lock onto it. But I forgot to put the edges on that. It's got to have 2 raised edges for the outside of the bearing on those particular ones, and they have got to grab onto the outside of the bearing, clamp together, and then your bolt has got to connect both sides on the inner of both sides of those. It's insanely complicated. Another thing is it takes a long time to develop processes in digital art and design are almost exactly the same as digital art. With digital art you'll do a picture, and then you'll have another picture and think, oh, that's very similar to that thing, I'll take that, and then you modify it. That's what I've been doing with digital art. With the development of designs, when you're working with this stuff, you have to develop all this stuff from the ground up, so it takes a huge amount of time. And what I did, and I don't know whether I've got the file there, I'll just try and see if I can find it. I did a test with, where are we, down there, and that is down there, down there, down there, down there, go to the end, just hang on a second, show you my beautiful ceiling, control end. That's bloody not in there. Oh, here we go, here. Right. This was the test I did with servo motors, and I found that working with this little frame in Arduino was fraught with peril, because you can touch that, you can contact that on things, and it can fry the board. And I needed to work on the board. I couldn't see the pins, my eyesight's terrible, but it's very, very small writing, so I built this thing for working on the Arduino board, like that. It doesn't actually sit on there, but that's how this works. And you've got the two little lights pointing on there, which are they're movable. But that's, I designed that when I was in due process of making that board. But the thing about these movable jigs, these things here, I can never get them to work. You need to work in electronics every day to get those to work. It's like working with a piece of spaghetti. It's falling to pieces all over the place. You'll cross wires, you'll drop the whole unit. It's a pain in the butt. I've found in actual fact that the perfect type is your Meccano set. That's a solid as. That really is solid, right? So you've got a fairly big connection, a nice big flat surface, and you don't have to put a lot of tension on it to lock it in place, and it doesn't move. It's all like these things. It's stupid. It doesn't work. And the screws I'm going to use for this, I use this principle here on this model I was building. And what I need are these types of screws. Where you've got a big flat face. Where are we? These type of ones. Where they've got a big flat face. And that's what you need to work with this. And make an assembly up so when I'm working on the board, I can be screwing it up with a little stumpy screwdriver like that, and you tighten up the screws and you lock your frame in place and work on your Arduino board. But all this stuff's got to be developed, so I developed that for the Arduino. I started making that board up. I'm working on this wheel at the moment. That's me 3D print nearly finished. I got that finished, but I found that this didn't work right because that's grabbing on both the inner and the outer, and it didn't work. I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't rotate. So it's got to run two bearings. It's got to run inner and outer. And also you've got to go through the frame, and it's got to clamp onto the frame, and it can only go halfway through. And it's got to clamp either side of the frame, and then it's got to connect to the two outers on the screw that bolts it all together. So this is very, very complicated, this stuff. I actually got a servo motor to work. That's in this file. But it takes a long time with this stuff, and this is a machine I want to build. I want to make a real one of these. I'm going to start off building a toy one, then a big humongous one. So all this is in due process. I'm working on all of it, but it takes a lot of time. Clive Rocksinger, over and out.